Welcome to a voice for creators. I'm your host, Daniel Norton. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about being an artist. I was reading an interview the other day of one of the founders of Pixar, Ed Catmull, and they said something to the effect of being an artist isn't about learning to draw or paint, but rather learning to see. And I thought that is such a great statement, and it really is the truth. Whatever technique you use, whatever gear you use, things you're trying to emulate, all of this comes down to how we see the world. If we don't have a unique way of seeing, we won't have anything to show. So how do we learn to see? Just by looking at other art, by taking classes, listening to a podcast or YouTube videos? How is it that we learn our own unique way of taking in the world? Because that's what I really get from this. Not seeing as in, oh, I see a detail over here I'm going to paint, but seeing as in a unique vision, a way of interpreting what's around us. There was, maybe it's still popular, there was a type of comedy that was popular in the 90s that was observational humor, they used to call it. And this, right, is a way of seeing. It's when the comedian just kind of talks about life, things that are going on that many of us can relate to. And as we're going through life, it just is what it is. But the way the comedian pulls those certain parts of it out creates a really funny story and thus entertaining. That is a way of seeing. The way a photographer decides to light their subject or interact with their subject to get the subject to react a certain way in a portrait. The way or the timing that a sports photographer has, or the way a camera operator in a movie uses the movement of the camera to create feeling and tension. All of these are ways that we see that we then use to create our art. Ultimately, the tools that we're using are unimportant, and the techniques on a lot of levels are unimportant. Those things come secondary. It's much like the discussions of style we've been having. One thing that I think can work really well is to try and learn to see through the eyes of other people. That is to look at the world through something that is effectively foreign lenses, if you will. Because for each of us in a room, the day looks different, right? If we sit down at a cafeteria on the street cafe, I guess, and we are having a cup of coffee or whatever, and we're watching people go by and we're seeing things happening, we are each going to see it with our own light. But instead of just looking at the world through the way you think, look around, see some people that are different than you. Imagine for yourself or think for yourself, what are they seeing here? What do they see when they look at their graffiti on the wall or the posters or a car going by with an advertisement on it or driving too fast or too slow? Do they when they see a bicycle go by? And even better, if you can, ask them. Interact with people. What did they see? What did they think? And I don't mean interviewing people, but genuinely have a conversation with somebody different than you. Sometimes this is one of the best ways to learn, and a good thing to do when you're traveling. If you go to a different place where it's not your hometown, right? Then you can see through other people's eyes. But also if you are in your hometown, right? You see some people who are clearly tourists. I mean, I'm from New York, so that's easy to do. We have a lot of tourists, obviously. Help them, talk to them, engage them. They seem to be lost or something. Strike up a conversation. Oh, where are you going? Blah, blah, blah. Where are you from? Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, why did you choose to do this? What else are you seeing on your trip? See things through somebody else's eyes and learn why some things might be important to people and other things not, right? Simple as that. So that's kind of a one technique. The other technique that I would suggest is to take time. It might be 5 minutes a day. It might be a minute a day. A minute's probably not enough time, but 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And really just find something to focus upon. Sit outside in the park, watch the birds, or the leaves fall, or a squirrel, or somebody playing a game. Watch pedestrians go by. Watch the light reflect off the car windshields as they zoom by you. Sit in a library and watch the beams of light coming through the window and the little bits of dust kind of floating by. See how they change. Take a walk through a park and see different people doing different things. But take a moment, stop, pause. Don't just watch it going past you like it's some Instagram feed that you're just whipping by. Actually take the time to look. Take the time to see. Take that moment. Sit by the side of the pond. See the reflection of the light on the water. See the shadows of the trees. Hear the sounds. Feel the wind on your skin. Take in that moment. What is there? What are you absorbing in? Forget about the rest of the day. Forget about everything else that's going on. It's those feelings, those moments that we draw on to create our work, which hopefully somebody else can meditate upon and find their center. Because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're creating something that somebody else can enjoy, somebody else can focus on, somebody else can use as a way to break away from the mundane. That is what we want as artists, to create moments for people, to share moments. And again, it doesn't have to be that I'm looking at the pond and seeing the water and this and that now. That doesn't have to be the moment that I'm sharing. In fact, don't share that moment. That's yours. That should be the fuel that feeds your lighting, your interactions, your other things that make the photos that you make later. So I'm going to keep this episode a little bit short. Take what I just said into your mind, and let's do that this week. Let's make 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, each of us, to look around us, to learn to see better. One of the best ways to support a small podcast like this one is to share it, but to also give it a rating on whatever podcatching software you use, or give it a review. And if you review it, I will read it here on the air. So I got another one this week. Deanne is my favorite Muppet. 5 stars. That one's a deep dig there. That's a slight full. Very real, no ego trip. Enjoy his perspective. Humble, smart pod. Good audio. Well, thanks. The Muppet thing, just in case you don't know, there is actually technically a puppet. Do not sue me, Jim Henson's estate, of me that we use in some of my videos. So if you haven't caught that, I think he'll be making another appearance soon. So thanks for listening, everybody. Like I said, if you want to support the podcast, please do rate it and review it. If you've already done that, the best way to do it, and even if you haven't, I guess, is to share it. Share the podcast around. If you have somebody in your life that is interested in photography or the arts, please do share the podcast. That's the best way to get it in front of people. Okay, I've got an email from Mark here. It's got a lot of questions in it, but I thought one of these was kind of interesting. I'm just going to summarize. Effectively, he was listening to another podcast, and they were interviewing or talking with a makeup expert, and the discussion kind of went in the direction of the finished product, printed in this case, not looking right. People of different complexions in the same photo, and a single person with darker skin complexion. Okay, so again, maybe this might be better to take on the YouTube end of it. And actually, I did do a video about this that will come out soon. But I'm just going to throw a couple of things out there as kind of general statements for artists. Number one, when we produce an image, no matter what it is, it could even be a painting or something, if it's going to be reproduced, that is in a print medium, on a brochure, even if it's online or on a billboard, we often, at least on some level, lose some control there. We can do certain things to help minimize that. One would be to make custom color profiles for your monitor and stuff, and to attach those to the images when you're giving them to like a print house, and make sure that when they do the CMYK separations that they use them, right? So of course, if you're not there, sometimes that's hard to deal with. Another thing could be to go to the lowest common denominator, like sRGB, when you're giving it to, say, somebody who's going to put it online, because that's going to be the cleanest thing on most monitors. When you switch to it, it may not look as good as the Adobe RGB or whatever that you've got it, and you're going to lose a little depth and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that you can have it look great on your computer, but if it doesn't look that way in other places, that's going to be a problem. I know plenty of photographers who have complained about, their images once they see them online or printed. This is not uncommon. But I think this is directly related to the idea of different people of different color skin tone, or especially darker skin tones. And what I'll say about that is this: dynamic range. This is where shooting flat is important. When we are creating for commercial product, generally, we want to shoot things flatter than we think they should be. That would be my advice to you. Make sure that you've got separation in tone, but keep things more or less flat. If you do that, then when it goes to print, it will add contrast usually because it's a lower dynamic range, and that should help a lot. But if you are talking about, like, let's say dark-skinned people or, against, let's say, about light background, you want to be careful to make sure that balance is correct. You don't want to have it be too extreme, because one of two things will happen. Either they'll print it properly for the skin tone and the background will be terrible, or they'll print it, and this is probably what happens a lot, unfortunately, for the background, and the skin tone looks terrible. Because again, the person doing the color separation wasn't there. So this can be very tricky, and another reason why we often photograph, if it's commercial for use, we photograph a color card, like an X-Rite card. It has a bunch of squares in it of different colors, and that helps them see where things should fall. So shooting an X-Rite color chip can be helpful if you're photographing things that are pretty extreme contrast-wise. Try to make them a little bit flatter if you're going to put them for print medium versus online. And again, if you're going to go online, try like sRGB. A lot of that stuff will help. The lighting is definitely a part of it, and I don't want to say it's not. Obviously, bad lighting will be a problem. But the idea, too, that you need to like make massive adjustments to how you do things based on the skin tone of the person in your image, it really isn't accurate. If you have a proper exposure where they look proper in the camera, then it should print out fine. So yeah, that was a little technical, but again, sometimes we'll get into that here. By the way, Mark also sent me a question asking, hopefully it's fine to say this publicly, about the mentoring and the Patreon that I mentioned last time. It's not ready yet. Possibly by next podcast, I'll do a soft launch, so I'll put it out to you guys first here at the podcast. I'm going to offer limited mentoring. If you are far away, it's going to be through Zoom. I've been doing a bunch of this and it works out really well. If you're close to New York or you want to come to New York, you can also do it in person. Those tend to be a little bit more workshop-y. So if you're close and you want to take a workshop where you can actually, interact with subjects and use some of my gear, which is always nice, or bring your own, that's also another option. So those will become available soon. Bear with me there. I am starting a Discord channel, and I will also launch that too. If you are a part of the Patreon, you're going to get higher levels in the Discord, but even if you're not, you'll be able to jump in there and chat with other enthusiasts as well. So that's going to be super fun. So thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate the support I've had with this podcast. You guys are great. If you would like to hear your voice or your words or have your questions answered on the podcast, do reach out to me. You can either use the Anchor app, just look at the show notes. There'll be a link. You could also send me an email, avoice@dnphoto.com. That link will also be in the show notes. And you could attach a voice file if you want to have your voice on the air. You could also write up an email and I will read it or answer it on the air. I'll talk to you soon.